Kirsten? Is her name Kirsten? Kirsten! Hey everyone! So today we're going to be going over every single book that I read in the first month of 2021. I read 12 books in total, which is a little faster than what I'm used to, but since I have a goal of 100 books by the end of the year, I wanted to start with a good foot forward, and this means that I only have to read about 8 books a month for the rest of the year. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start going over my reads. So the first book that I finished this year was actually the third book in the Bargainer trilogy, Dark Harmony by Laura Thalassa. I totally butchered that name and I'm so sorry. Let me see what it... Laura Thalassa? I'm so sorry. I've never heard it spoken out loud. Either way, I ended up giving this book 3 stars. I thought it was fine. I pretty much gave the entire series 3 stars. It had a very nice romance, but it felt like a lot of times that the plot was very much second to it, and honestly, in certain dark fantasy romances like this, that's a common theme. If that's something you're into, maybe this is a book for you. I personally, while I love a romance, need a little more substance to end up bumping it into my 4 and 5 star category. But overall, I thought the trilogy was perfectly fine. If you are into really fantasy romances with, fae men, then you would like this. And I know there's a huge audience for that. Let me just continue on here. Where is it? Oh, there it is. Ha! It's right in front of me. The second book that I read this month is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. I am usually not a dystopian person. I personally go towards high fantasy, low fantasy, high sci-fi, low sci-fi, all of that faster than I'll go for a dystopian novel. That being said, this is one of the 2 books that are 5 stars for me this month. And I want to give a personal shout out to my coworker who forced me to read this and was very adamant about it being an amazing book. So thank you, Steve. I also want to thank my sister. This was a Christmas present from her. It was on my Goodreads. She also recommended it very highly to me. Station 11 is a dystopian novel set after a pandemic takes over the world, killing a large swath of the population. We flash between the perspective of Kirsten, who was a little girl when the pandemic struck, and a few other characters that you see pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. This book was phenomenal. It made me feel just so many things, like hope in times of adversity, my love for humanity, even when we are seeing the worst humanity has ever gone through. And it also just ties things together so perfectly with characters that you feel are real. These are how people would really react in these scenarios, and some rise and some fall. And all the meanwhile, this is getting intertwined with stories from pre-pandemic of people just living their lives and making mistakes. And somehow, I don't know how she did it, but it just comes together in the most beautiful of ways and in the most satisfying of conclusions, even with some loose ends still there. I would highly recommend, even if you're not in the dystopian genre, to give Station 11 a try. It ended up surprising me so much, and I honestly am so glad that people recommended me reading this, even though they knew it wasn't my preferred genre. The third book I read I don't actually have on me, seeing as it was lent to me by a friend, and that is Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. I hated this book. And I'm really sorry to my friend who lent it to me. She really liked it, and she has a very cute story of her and her fiance reading it together. I hated it. I hated every moment of it. I hated the main character. I hated the side characters, and I would say I hated the plot, but I didn't think there was one. I have nothing against John Green. When I was a teen, I read Looking for Alaska, and I read Will Grayson, which I loved. I just didn't like this one at all. I feel like in this book, there weren't characters. There were points that John Green wanted to make. And because of that, all the characters, to me at least, seemed very one-dimensional. It follows a girl with OCD. That is basically what the entire story is about. And I will give it this. It handles OCD extremely well. It definitely opened up my eyes into this crippling mental disorder and how it can affect people's lives in every aspect. I will absolutely not take that away from this book. It is amazing at what it does for that reason and that purpose. I just personally think that he could have spent some more time developing a plot to go underneath that and developing multifaceted characters. Overall, I rated this 2 stars out of 5 simply because I think that the redeeming qualities of looking at OCD through this lens was amazing. I just didn't think the book was very good or entertaining. It's a shame that we can't have both. I guess that's my final thoughts. Also, no hate on John Green. If you are into John Green, if you like flowery writing, and if you like, talking about issues that are not really going to be addressed in certain other forms of media, this book might be for you, and that's totally fine. We have different opinions. Going on my Green Brothers kick, I then read An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. I really liked this book. I was pleasantly surprised. I have been following Hank Green for a very long time. I think his science videos and his science TikToks are hilarious and so informative, and they just itch that little curiosity beast inside me. That being said, I did not really know that he wrote any books and was an author. So when my friend gave this to me along with the John Green book, I was so excited to read this because I knew I liked him as a person and he had the kind of similar humor that I did. I ended up really liking this book. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. It was a great little sci-fi story that took a very interesting turn on a narrator. It almost reminds me of Agatha Christie books. Obviously, if you know Agatha Christie, you probably know the one I'm talking about. That is not a spoiler. There's not that kind of plot twist in this book, but it's that. I don't know if that was too vague. I just probably lost half of the people who were watching this when I tried to explain something without explaining it. Either way, it was a very interesting point of view. This story follows a girl who has recently found herself in the limelight after taking a video that was supposed to be joking with a statue that she finds in New York with her friend. It ends up getting crazy, and things are progressing steadily. And while this main character has flaws, she also has flaws that are very relatable. I often found myself empathizing with her and sympathizing with her. Even though I knew she was making the wrong decisions, I didn't know if I would make different ones, which is very interesting. Anyways, jump into the book, meet the Carls, and explore whether you're a good person or not, I guess. I guess I'm finding out that maybe I'm not that good of a person. The next book I read was Flipped by Wendelin Van Dronen. Sorry if I said that wrong. Flipped was another book that was recommended to me this month. You can see a trend in pattern that is going on. I told people about my 100-book reading goal this year, and the recommendations just came flooding in. So my best friend, she recommended me this book. She said that she read it when she was younger and that it ended up being a huge impact on her and her life. So I decided to give it a go. I ended up giving this book 3 out of 5 stars. A lot of that has to do with the fact I'm not the target audience. This was obviously written for a much younger generation, much younger age group, and it just wasn't me. I read a lot of dark adult fantasy, and this was a very endearing and heartwarming story about these 2 characters who are kind of trying to navigate how not to be assholes. I mean, to say the least. I think that this story goes over things that are very important for kids in maybe the middle grade age group to learn about. So unfortunately, it just wasn't for me personally, but I do think that if I had someone in middle school or maybe the first few grades of high school that wanted something to read, I would definitely recommend this book to them. It's a fairly short read. I think it ends up being only a bit above 200 pages. So it was a really quick one, and it ends up talking about things that are really important to start thinking about around that age and start kind of developing empathy for these kinds of people. Alrighty, and on to my second 5-star read of the year, and that would be, no duh, I'm sure you've heard it before, Mistborn. So I must be the last person in the fantasy genre to read Mistborn, at least the first trilogy, because, wow, I love it. Brandon Sanderson, you're an amazing author. This is incredible. If you haven't read Mistborn, it follows a girl named Vin as she is trying to navigate a society where metals give certain people powers, and there is a race called the Ska that is being discriminated against and used basically as slaves. This book, everything that you've heard other people say is true. It's amazing. It's written so well. You're so invested in the magic system, and it just grips you from the start and you can't stop. I am currently reading the third book in the series, and I don't think I'm going to finish before the end of the month, so I'll put that on my February reads, even though I probably did the majority of the reading this month, but you know, whatever, we'll give it to the other one. It's fine. If you like a lot of politics in your fantasy, if you like really strong main characters, and you love hard magic systems, and you haven't read Mistborn yet, you need to do it. You just need to get onto it. Because let me tell you, it doesn't disappoint. Just read it. Just read it. It's a 5-star read for me. It's my kind of garbage. I'm so here for it. It's not even garbage. It's my kind of book. Read Mistborn. The next book I read was Den of Vipers. If you know, you know. I thought I knew, and then I read it, and then I spent most of my time like this. Dear Lord. Oh my. I was not prepared. It is exactly what it's marketed as, and I'm not gonna explain it to you. If you know, you know. It traumatized me, as my friend said. I am horny and confused. I read it. I read all the pages. I will never forget that I read all the pages. I refuse to read it. Dad, don't ask me about it. I don't want to talk to you about it. On a more optimistic note, the next book that I read was Stormfront by Jim Butcher. I had been intimidated to start the Dresden Files. It is such a long series with such devoted fans, but after Battlegrounds and Peace Talks got so many awards and love last year, I decided that I would take the plunge and get into it. If you really like me and you read a lot of your parents' books as you were growing up, I'm talking James Patterson, Michael Connelly, all of those thriller mysteries, and you kind of developed a reading style off of those, then you would probably like this book. Personally, I'm very into fantasy, but I had a lot of my foundations of reading in those mystery thrillers. So when I read this, it was a lot like coming home, like nostalgia. Basically, this follows Harry Dresden, a PI and wizard in Chicago. I'm right about that, aren't I? Yes. As you can imagine, it is the opening to any mystery thriller ever. Someone dies, and he is called in to investigate. I really love these setups. I think incorporating the fantasy world into this kind of film noir, Chicago noir crime book actually ended up working really well, which just surprised me because I thought that was probably going to end up being way too cheesy for me and just not work. I ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars. Obviously, I didn't think it worked amazingly, but it was good enough that I will continue with the series. I've heard that it just gets better. There are certain books that are better than others and certain that are much worse. But that is kind of the way things go, especially in this kind of Chicago noir crime detective genre. The next book that I read was Well of Ascension, the second book in the Mistborn trilogy, and that is by Brandon Sanderson, of course. I love this book, but I did not like it as much as I liked the first book. I only gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. It is very heavily political. If you like political fantasy, you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of a world's politics system, you'll probably love this book. It's just not as action-packed as the first entry into this series was. And I personally kind of missed some of the conniving elements that I think you could have added in. But either way, I thought it was amazing. I love these characters. Again, I don't want to spoil anything, but Ellen is my favorite person ever. Anyway, yes, 4 out of 5 stars. I loved this book, obviously. We'll see what I end up reading the last one. The next book that I read this month was Grimspace by Anna Guire. I rated this 2 out of 5 stars. I thought there were a lot of redeeming elements. Personally, I thought the relationship was cute, and I thought that the action scenes were written fairly well. But this is only around a 300-page book, so a fairly short read. It probably would have ended up being a 4-star read for me if it was 300 pages more. Aguirre ended up just trying to fit too many things into too few pages, and I feel like it ended up hindering the plot quite a bit. I felt like the plot ended up getting abandoned completely about halfway through, and we didn't have enough time to fully learn about the characters, about what kind of decisions they would make, about who they were as people, before we were suddenly thrust into this world and kind of being dragged along with them. And that's not to say I don't like fast pacing. I do. I really enjoy being thrown into a world and having to figure it out as I go. This is just a little bit different because there's a difference between fast pacing and not getting enough time or enough chances to learn the characters or learn the plot in entirety. Next, I read Prey of Gods by Nikki Drayden. I read this book as a part of my Diversify Your Bookshelf challenge. This is all about giving authors of color, gender identities, and sexual identities a chance to share the limelight with a lot of white authors that end up being a majority of the bestsellers. It also encourages people to read books that have different kinds of protagonists, mainly ones of color, different gender identities, sexual identities, and such. I am so glad I ended up picking this up. I think Nikki Drayden did an amazing job. This is a sci-fantasy that is set in South Africa in the distant future. It follows multiple different perspectives, and these characters, oh my gosh, you guys, I fell in love with every single one. No matter how annoying or flawed they were at times, they were so human, and they went through just so many things. This book talks about sexual violence, pedophilia, allusions to rape, and a host of issues and addictions with drugs. You should know about this before you go in, which is why I'm adding it as a disclaimer here. I think that books should come with disclaimers for certain triggering topics like these. There is a lot of care given to these characters that are going through this, and you have a lot of people from the LGBTQ+ community that are featured in this book, which is amazing. Seeing as I am part of that community myself, it's great to see these kinds of representations hitting mass media. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. I thought that the world building was amazing, and I honestly, genuinely hope that there's a sequel because I would love to learn what happens after that last chapter. Either way, I would really recommend it. I think it's a great challenge to be a part of as Diversify Your Bookshelf. And I also believe that this author truly deserves some love. I think she's doing amazing things within the sci-fantasy genre, which again, I don't necessarily like mixing my science fiction and my fantasy very often, but this was done just so well, and they were just such real people that I thought it was more about character development and character choices than one genre over the other. And this brings me to my last read of the month, which, as you guessed, is another recommendation. So my dad has been trying to get me to read Artemis by Andy Weir for so long after he made me read The Martian about 3 or 4 years ago, and I loved it. Artemis is about a colony on the moon, and specifically a girl within that colony who is acting as a smuggler trying to get by in this very luxury-forward environment. This book stars a POC female protagonist who has a lot of ties to her faith and her family, while also trying to diverge from them as much as she can in this new moon environment, moon society that she finds herself in. A lot happens. If you like morally gray characters as much as I do, you will love Jazz. And it's kind of almost like a heist book, not to the same extent as Mistborn or Six of Crows, but it does have a lot of those elements of trying to get to this ultimate goal. Well, that's it, guys. Thank you so much for sticking around. I am looking forward to reading so many more books in February and giving you another update. If there were any books on here that you would like a more in-depth review about, please let me know. I will be doing an in-depth review after I've finished the last book of Mistborn, and you will see all of my thoughts about that, both spoiler-free and with a lot of spoilers. Obviously, I have a lot to talk about regarding Mistborn. As always, thank you so much, and I will see you next time.